We are here to discuss preliminarily, somewhat preliminarily, the downstairs, the project as such, and renovation of the town hall, and we will proceed into, deal with that immediately. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay. Jeff, do you want to have any transitional comments?
Jeff?
Just a comment. Our purpose today is not to reach any conclusions or decisions. We certainly will do that very shortly. Really, it's an informational session for the Board of Selectmen to understand how certain of the concerns expressed by the Council on Aging with respect to the design of this next phase of the town hall renovation might be addressed. Reviewing what they are, what their costs might be, some of the pros and cons and those types of things. And we have, again, our designer, Mr. Kevin Rothschild-Shea, and also Bill Cannon is with him today to help walk us through that.
Sure. So I'm happy to offer an update. I'll try to not break my microphone. So since we last met, we've informally discussed some of the needs with the Council on Aging, the senior group downstairs, looked at the kitchen space, the equipment. We have looked at design options to improve access to the town hall in a number of fronts, everything from the relative west end for independent access to a modification of the design approach on the south or side entry, as we call it, along the driveway. And we'll specifically talk about that a little bit today. Parallel to that, we are reaching out and working with the contractor that's assisted with some of the preliminary budgets. We're updating the base budget for the design as it was originally developed and as presented in recent town meetings. Enough time has passed that budget needs to be updated so that when we come back to the town, we have an understanding of the costs for the original design. We're expanding that to include the developments for the two potential kitchen schemes and what the cost impacts of that expansion and that work might be. And we're also, we will be adding on and expanding the pricing to include an alternate ramp scheme that we're largely here to talk about today. So in looking at the plan, I brought Bill Cannon here with me. He's the key designer, architect that helps me bridge the site in the building. We're handling the access within the building. Our base scope, for recap, really is to implement or install an elevator that will traverse all levels of the building. It'll improve and offer access that's compliant with our mandate with the state. And hopefully we can get out from under the waivers and the timeline that's in front of us. And along with that, we'll be improving or providing a fire sprinkler system, upgrading the electrical systems, and then of course there's lots of little cut and patch and doors and minor alterations that go with that. So that's kind of the base scope that we've been building around, with a really specific focus on how do we get in the building, what does it look like, what does it cost, and then how do we handle the impact on the kitchen and food service and the seniors downstairs. So as a round picture, that's what we're talking about. And today specifically, this exhibit here is the original design that we've been carrying around for the last year or two. This design is based on a ramp, or not a ramp, but a sloping walk that gains access from the driveway where we go up to a sloping walk heading west, and then we switch back and continue up to a raised landing, and that has a stair that also comes back down and connects at that central connection point. This is designed as a walk, not a ramp. This design, as we all know, accessed only the upper level. We've met some concerns and some needs where we want to have and try to develop direct access to the lower level. So we have developed a preliminary plan to highlight that. So the next drawing behind us is not in color yet. This is a developed preliminary drawing. If things evolve and pricing comes into play, for presentation's sake. It'll eventually be fully developed and rendered for presentation. This is really a working meeting for us to talk about the pros and cons. So basically, what this plan does, and I'm not sure if the camera can capture this, we are working all along the south end of the building, along the street side. We're basically tearing the roof off the ramp that's there. We're tearing the ramp out that's there. We're tearing the stairs down, all of it. We may keep a central concrete structural wall down the middle. That seems to be clean and intact, and then build around that. After that, we have a hard time finding a lot of economies. Sometimes when you try to work around too much existing material, it just costs you in handiwork, indirect or with direct workers, hammers, tools, versus a contractor with a great big excavator where they scoop it up and take it away. So generally speaking, this approach would tear everything that's out there off the building. We would modify and develop a sidewalk that paralleled the driveway, so when people walk relative east-west along that drive lane, they don't feel like they're walking out in the street and dodging cars. That's part of the plan to create and maintain this south entrance to the town hall that's not a back door, side door, but a reasonably respectable entry and elevation to the town. And we say that just to give it the proper scale and the proper pedestrian control, safety, and the aesthetic. What we do, we want to be a good investment for the town, so where people can feel good about coming to the town hall, feel safe, and then we can develop a handsome renovation to that facade. So simple things like just developing a continuous walkway, it will clean things up and help manage circulation. Basically, from the existing stair that exits right out here on this exit hallway, that will remain. We will modify and produce a ramp going down to the lower level. So basically the slab that's there, all that'll get ripped out. It'll all get regraded with proper, that needs an intermediate landing, ramp up, new landing, a whole lot of concrete work. So that will get redone, dropping down to the lower level door. We would maintain, as I said, that concrete wall. We would then switch back and ramp up. And when we say ramp, that's a pitch of a rise of 1 foot for every 12 linear feet. That ramp going up would also require an intermediate landing, and then it would arrive at a landing similar to what's there now. Some of the things that are a little bit different here, one, we're basically creating a wider landing at the top, which means a wider structure that's over the door to the basement. Okay, so basically we have to put a structural slab in to support it, similar to what it is now, but we need to widen it because if we all look at the space that's there, and I brought a couple of photos, not kind of counting on a camera access. The stair that's there now is only about 28 inches wide, goes down on a kind of a diagonal wedge. In our review, it's really not an entrance worthy of the town hall. So our thought was to widen the landing a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, incorporate that with a structure that bridges the lower level. That creates an opportunity to do something of a raised pier, which you can actually see here in that elevation, which would all be done in brick, be capped with capstone or precast stone, and then we could do a decorative lantern on that raised pier right here. So as you're going up the ramp, you would see a brick pier that would stand about 30 inches, 34 inches tall, with a cap, meet all the guardrail requirements with a finish at 42. With a decorative lantern on top, done in nice traditional style to match the brick and the stone that's here. So we would basically develop a 6 foot long pier at the end, about 2 feet, 2 foot 4 inches wide. And then opposite that would be a stair connecting straight down to grade and the new sidewalk that paralleled the street. So that stair would be about 5 or 6 feet wide. Something not huge, but reasonable and respectable and in scale with the traffic that comes and goes. So basically that kind of cleans this up. It creates a symmetrical landing about the front door, which has the decorative trim work and molding. So it would create, it's a pretty sizable piece of construction to build all of that out of concrete. Just to do the landing, we have to do a structural reinforced slab, waterproof membranes, and then a topping slab. Otherwise, if you don't do the multiple layers of structure, waterproofing, and finishing, that's when the water starts coming through. You start getting rust and peeling through the concrete. So it's a manageable piece of work. We can do that, and we're counting on it. At the opposite end, or the west end, we're proposing also a similar ending pier or landing pier, which would be a masonry pier with a cap and a decorative light. So all that could also, we could put some arms on it for some hanging plants. It would be a nice little traditional masonry, kind of element on each end. So we basically take what's there and kind of bring it up a level in terms of the aesthetic, the scale, the clearance, and the approach. We would do ornamental iron railings, similar to what we were going to do before. So some of these things are kind of a swap from the earlier price. Some of these things are a definite change and increase in scope. So that being said, we have a plan where we basically rebuild what's there, correcting it, and improving it in terms of its aesthetic. So to that end, we will generate pricing to show what it will cost to do this scheme compared to the original scheme.
So we haven't done that yet?
No. We haven't done that yet because we first needed to present the concepts,
Okay.
and we have a couple options to talk to you folks about.
Okay.
The knowing that snow, rain elements are a concern, especially on the lower level, we have a couple proposals there. One, to produce a similar flat roof to the structure for protection. But let me see if I could pull out a couple of my photos here for reference sake. So one of the concerns we have, and excuse the informal graphic nature, but so here's a photograph. When you're on the upper landing at the town hall, we'll call it side entry, this is your view, right? It's out to the corrugated metal and plastic. Not the most handsome view in the world. We understand the need and the aesthetic and the benefit to having a cover on the ramp. To that end, we have a couple of suggestions, and Bill has some experience with this as well. One of those, if I could pull out a good photo reference here, Bill, I think you brought something as well, would be to basically develop this as a flat roof. It would be a rubber membrane roof. Okay, you're shaking your head.
No.
Okay, so one thought is to develop this as a flat roof. It would basically follow the wall and cover only the ramp going down, or the majority of the ramp going down. And we have two options. One is to do a planted green roof. So it would be, as you come up the ramp, instead of going by, rusty, dirty gutters and metal and, you would then have a chance to look at basically a planting, which could be done either in soil or they do it with potted trays and you just lay them in. So basically what happens is you do your a rubber membrane on the roof, you put down a layer of a drainage board, where you would go insulation with insulation on a deck, rubber membrane, a protection board, and then a drainage fabric that would then allow water to go through the soil. You plant either in trays or in earth. It's only 3 or 4 inches deep. You're not putting in a foot of earth. And then you plant all that on top, and you'd have the ability to, and Bill, you could talk about the type of plants, but low-lying ground cover that'd be up there. So one, the benefit is it's cooler. It absorbs a lot of heat. It absorbs a lot of rain and water on its way down off the upper roof to this roof. And it's a little managed kind of microcosm. So we like the idea that it's green. The town's showing nice forward steps in terms of green. You might be some money out there from CPA for either whether energy or sustainable design. This is certainly in the forefront of that kind of design approach. But it does come with some maintenance. You have to water it or irrigate it. You might have to weed it and keep track of it. And I don't know, Bill, you want to talk a little bit about how the planting would work? That's really your forte.
Yeah, well, just in terms of maintenance, I just to expound upon that a little bit. There has been a lot of technology involved in developing these green roof systems and everything else. And depending on the use, the exposure, the type of plants that you want to use. You can get into various construction methods for the depth of soil. As Kevin suggested, just going with a kind of a very thin substrate, something that would be what we call an engineered soil, which has some lightweight properties to it, so that we don't have to, get into a super, structural issue with the roof support, would be appropriate. But in this particular case, where we have a shallow planting medium, we could go with something with sedums and succulents, low perennial flower type of species that don't require watering per se. So we get into drought, what we call drought tolerant plant material, which would minimize the need for water and everything else. So we recognize that, every time we kind of turn around and kind of suggest these, these alternatives, what kind of maintenance is involved in these kind of things and everything else. And we certainly can go into a direction where we drastically minimize the maintenance that town might incur. I kind of wholeheartedly agree with Kevin that this might be kind of like a nice little gesture of kind of getting into some, sustainable design, if you will, with the green roof. But because of the ramping system that we've got out there, the direction and entering from this entrance, entrance into the building in here, you've got a complete exposure to this roof system here and everything else. And I can kind of only suggest that this might be a very attractive way of dealing with this roof exposure from the general public.
So that's not to say that we can't, that said, we could put a rubber roof down, be black, white, or gray, and bare bones, base level, it is what it is.
Right.
It keeps the rain out.
Yeah.
It manages the snow. Like you said before, we're not here to spend the town's money, but we want to come up with a design that invests the town money and you get the requisite product worthy of a town hall. So we know there's a midpoint there. And so the baseline would be a membrane roof. We have very little height between the roof and the windowsills that are adjacent to do a sloped roof. Shingle would not be appropriate. We would be like at a 1 in 12 to do a standing seam metal or something like that. And it just doesn't strike me as the ideal opportunity to use a sloping roof system there. The last thing, which is kind of not our favorite option, so if we say membrane is base, a planted roof would really be a handsome, environmentally sound design approach that we really like the idea of, would be B. And the third choice, which is a little bit, let me see here, less of an option, would be still to do a membrane roof, but potentially to, similar to this, a kind of a pergola, we basically would, across the roof here, build a lattice of, and this is like buying another decorative roof system, like we're buying a planted roof. This would basically be buying a framed lattice work like you'd see on a outdoor, pergola or a gazebo or a canopy or a garden space. So we would basically build an entire roof system, and Brendan from my office did a little sketch here where we'd build the whole roof with steel and decking and everything else, and then we would do this decorative frame and lattice work that sat above it. And the idea there is that at least when you're on the upper landing, you kind of look out and you see just a lattice screen of white painted. I would recommend a PVC or some composite so it doesn't peel and require maintenance, just to develop a screen. Or when you're going up the ramp, you see the decorative kind of tails coming out the edge rather than just seeing the edge of a metal design. So in terms of options, that's how we kind of see the best way to approach having to live next to this roof for the next 20 or 30 years, right? You've probably got 30 years out there looking at the edge of that gutter. we would hope to not have to look at that gutter and the leaves and the dirt there for another 20 or 30.
How does that last option do in snow?
Well, this doesn't matter. The snow would just go through, sit on the roof, and when it melts, it goes down the roof drain.
Okay.
It's really a screen. So if the snow piles up around it, it just piles up around it, just as if the snow sat on top of the membrane roof. This would just sit, we would build the entire same roof and then just float a screen above it. Just as a visual cue to kind of break up the monotony. Because what happens, the black roofs, this rubber will basically kind of chalk off, they say, to a medium gray, charcoal gray. The whites and the grays tend to not absorb as much heat, so when you walk next to them, they're cooler. But with the whites and the grays, if you've ever been on a white or gray roof, they're just all basically filled with dirt stains and spirals and ponding around the roof drains from when the water sits and when the leaves land and then when they get blown off. It just ends up being kind of a stained, dirty looking surface. On the top of a big building, it's not an issue, nobody cares. But here we have to walk by and look at every day. You walk out, all you do is see a nice white or gray, environmentally sensitive roof, and it looks dirty. It's one of those things. So we're trying to think about what this looks like, and we're trying to balance that against the budget.
Have you reached a point that you're willing to recommend what you consider to be the practical and cost-effective scenario for the town? I mean, what we're ending up with now in a project that was projected at a lot less money because of the extent of the work that was going to be done versus what we're projecting now. I'm not saying what we're projecting now is bad, but we need to get a practical sense of what these costs are going to be. If this is too soon, fine, but we need to admit this up front before we make a decision of the board in terms of recommendation, I would think.
Right.
We want to know what we're going to go forward with the article or whatever process we're going to have to do in order to create I would call it a sustainable position for us.
Yep. No, I
And
understand.
remembering one of our board members is not here
Understood.
through no fault of his own. I mean, it's just
So,
the situation.
it's a little chicken and egg. We're pushing through the pricing
Yeah.
process. On one hand, we don't want to price anything that the town doesn't support and a direction that you don't want to go in. At the same time, we recognize you need to know what the costs are in order to have a working idea where you're going. So we're working on those price options so that we can follow up and present them. Since we were out here last week, I think we saw Phil and Marlene on site just in passing by. Bill and I took additional measurements. We took some pictures. We looked around, did some research to develop some of these alternatives to present to you. And that's how we see today as a working conversation to discuss what we're, tell you what we're thinking and what we've learned and what we see as good, viable options. So if we were to discover that, say, the green roof and the trellis cost the same, if they do, to me, our recommendation would be, well, we prefer the concept of the green roof because it does a lot of forward-thinking things. Especially environmentally. Even for the people that use it, the roof structure will naturally stay cooler. In terms of the water that hits the site, that'll be reduced in terms of water management. And we all know just trying to get the water out the driveway and managing ice and snow in the winter is always a project. That being said, the town would have to sign on to invest in the idea and be willing to do a little bit of work and maintenance on this because it's a new thing. So that's where that's where we pass the baton. We think it's a good idea. If we think the pricing is right, then it takes your input and your final vote or support. If the numbers are out there and we push it up, then we say, all right, well, we go in with base bid, which is just a rubber roof. Maybe we do a design bid alternate if the money might be there, and you can think about the strategy to proceed with a design and a bid. Okay. So even if, say, in our preliminary phase, we say, all right, well, the base bid has increased by X%, and that's our starting point, because we know it's increased both from time and scope. So now we're talking about two add-ons to that, which are the green and the decorative trellis. And if we have to manage the money in the process, then we, move forward accordingly.
Yeah, Kevin, I would echo that sentiment that as a base bid, we can design a standard roof system, but as an alternate, perhaps price out in kind of a structured bidding system, the green roof option. Obviously, from my perspective, the green roof would be, as Kevin said, much more desirable and a lot more forward thinking and everything else. As an option, it might be a good way to go. That way there we get realistic figures on both, case scenarios.
Personally, I think your observation is right on target in terms of determining for townspeople what you would recommend, okay, given the financial capability. And if that doesn't work, or we deem it not appropriate because it's not cost effective from our point of view because of what's available, then the practical point again comes into play. It doesn't defeat the project, but it forces us to adhere to a concept that is more cost effective from our perspective. So I think you're right on target. My comments, even though they may seem somewhat negative, is not intended as that. I just want us to be pragmatic about this, because we don't have the final say, as you well know.
Right. So.
We have the final recommendation.
Yep.
But it's, townspeople are very
That
adept at, as I'm sure you're aware of as well.
Kevin has also brought up some other subtle design nuances, if you will, and everything else that, we think would add, they would add a little bit of a premium. But in my strong feeling is that it would also add a whole lot of character and ambiance to, this entrance and to the architecture of the building and everything else. And may be well worth it. Decorative, the light fixtures, set on some brick clad piers with a capstone or something. It's also appropriate that, we do introduce some permanent lighting, especially to the stairs and at the entrance to the ramps and everything else. Over in this area right here, we're suggesting there's a little bit of a paved area where as you're approaching it, you're going to either take the sidewalk, or you're going to take the ramp going up, or you're going to take the ramp going down. So there's a little bit of a space there that allows the pedestrian to make that determination. We also are suggesting a curb cut out at the driveway too, because I've noticed that people just drop off people here. So that'd be a way of, getting people onto this little paved area, sidewalk area that would allow you to either go up the ramp or down to the basement level as well. Did we talk about, the potential for maybe veneering the ramp
Yeah,
walls
those are
out there?
small. The idea is, in terms of this new ramp design, it would basically, the walls would be brick clad with maybe a precast capstone. We don't want to just pour, and does that cost more than just pouring a concrete wall? Yes. Our goal is to, like I said, not create a basement quality side backdoor entry to the design. We're also not trying to overstate and overbuild the design, but try to find something that's, like I said earlier, a reasonable aesthetic of invested quality for the town in terms of the ramp design. So like Bill points out, we need lighting, so we may as well capture the lighting and let it be a part of the decorative aesthetic that's typical to any municipal improvement, whether it was a library or town hall or police or fire station. You would have, some kind of landscaping or lighting that goes with it. So we're trying to balance and find that happy, once again, aim for that sweet spot in terms of the investment.
My observation in looking at the existing conditions out there, just one other little caveat here, Kevin, is that, it's all parged concrete wall system that's out there right now, and as you can see, there's quite a few places where it's starting to spall off already.
Yep.
And that's the kind of nature of a kind of a parged surface, if you will. And it will only get worse in time. Once it starts cracking, moisture gets behind it, starts popping it, and you know, you're into that kind of a ongoing maintenance issue. Perhaps if we put a little bit more of a permanent veneer surface on it, that we think would minimize some of the maintenance of this area as well.
Right. I mean, we've seen the deterioration that's out there now. So what Bill was referring to is the landing that comes out this stair. It's basically a painted or rubbed concrete finish. There's actually a reveal with a landing that overhangs the veneer an inch, inch and a half or so. Depending on how pricing works out, we might actually be able to apply a matching thin brick, half-inch thick thin, and coat just the two cheek walls that are exposed about 3.5 feet above grade. And basically, you know, potentially improve the look of that. Is that highest on our list today? No. Is it a design option or consideration? Sure, it's something we can do, and it's something we could also do as we develop the budgets and the pricing. Is it the kind of line item that would break the back of the project? No. But that's you know, a detail that we can kind of flush out, or it could be flushed out in the final design project. So, you know, basically, you know, we did look at the west entry in some preliminary sketches, a separate entrance. We saw that as a pure, huge increase in cost compared to moderately expanding on our original design. Because this way, we owned a fair amount of this work, and granted, we have to increase some of this work, but if we were to develop our old design and then a separate new entry to the west, that's a whole separate project that touches a whole other side of the building. The ramp was significantly long, another 44-foot-long ramp plus landing, plus the enclosure that was suggested. It's potentially turned into a project of scale that was approaching the scale of the side ramp. So it clearly, in preliminary analysis, it becomes obvious that one structure, one approach, one ramp really needs to be where we go. So if you think about, well, there's things here that we put a few dollars on the table in terms of investment, that's a far cry from building the original proposed design and building a whole other ramp and design. So the amenities and the aesthetic that we're trying to bring to the table here, even it almost makes the roof garden look like the most affordable thing that we could bring to the table, because we're not building a whole separate structure. Does it still have costs? Yes, and we've identified the potential cost, and we'll track all those because we know we want to bring to the town and bring forward to you a good, efficient solution that looks good. So we have looked at the west, and it clearly is a significant project. If we don't cover it, we have to drain it and manage the water. If we cover it, we have a whole other host of issues, not to mention cost is the first. So, you know, with that kind of history behind us, this approach really starts to, you know, frame a solution that expands on our first proposed solution and really makes a lot of sense.
And plus meets some of the desires of the COA too, for getting access access freely to the basement level, shall we say?
It's the best happy medium that answers all the needs that we have in front of us. And I don't see it as a compromise to the town. It is a change. I don't see you being totally compromised. And if anything, when we're done, you'll still have a good design solution in front of you. I think the only question really is you gain a little access, and we probably spend a few dollars in the process. But proportional to the total project, I think both are parallel and incremental. So that's what we see right now relative to this project. I don't know if we want to touch on any other issues or if that's...
Are you going to talk about the kitchen at all?
Yeah, I can briefly summarize some of what we know downstairs. Want to touch on that?
Yeah.
So what we did also, and I have a little CAD plan here, because we know that the elevator the core of the project, right, which is what drives all this other conversation about a ramp. Because the elevator has to happen, and it takes about 30 to 40% of the existing kitchen out of play, we know there's concerns about the layout, the efficiency, and the use of the kitchen. So what I have is this board here that we can expand upon, but for initial purposes, this drawing here shows the kitchen as it sits with each piece of equipment in its entirety. So we understand that there's a fair amount of dry goods or storage that could be relocated out of that space. We understand that there is some use of serving platters and serving ware that is probably, we'll call it a high performance use on a handful of days of the year. So basically when you have 40, 50, 60, 80 people, you need all the extra dishes and platters, but that only comes on a handful of times of the year. So we're trying to design a room that meets the need for 95% of the days of the year, and then we have ready access to the the storage and the equipment and supplies that you need for the remainder. So what I did as a base, I took our original plan space and reconfigured the kitchen. We tried to clean up the workflow a little bit. So on the opposite side, we basically relocated the fridge, oven with range hood, and then put prep and counter space adjacent. As a warming kitchen, the cooking is not a high function, but rather than have appliances on opposite corners of the room, we tried to create a lined kitchen. So everything on food prep could be on this one wall. We need a door to service the machine room. We keep the dishwash, this storage counter and dishwash area in the corner and the commercial dishwasher. And we relocate in I think we relocate one pantry and buy another pantry. So we have full height storage capacity. We have a central island, albeit a little narrower and a little shorter than the one that's there, but it's probably 70% of the island that's there. The functionality to work around it still exists. Is there a little less floor space to navigate it? Yes. In my experience, most kitchens and commercial cooks don't like a lot of space to roam around. They like to be able to go from counter to counter and, and prep to serving all in a nice tight flow. We add a hand wash sink directly adjacent to the dishwasher, keeping any plumbing proximate to the only plumbing in the kitchen. Then there's basically the steam tray, and a little bit of counter space support adjacent to it. So basically this is heading towards food service, and adjacent to the door we put in a small food service window. That would probably work most days on short or small personnel use or with relatively few guests. And I would suggest on the big holidays, when you have 80 people, you're almost better setting up a banquet line right outside the kitchen and do food service. The hallways are really wide, and that's what it would take. So this kitchen plan actually can work pretty efficiently in the existing space. Do we lose space? Do we lose counter? Do we lose cabinet? Yes. Could you still function there? I think so. Recognizing that those losses may or may not be palatable, I developed another plan where I kept the food service the same, storage and dishwash and hand wash the same, the islands the same. And what we do is go through the wall to what is now the building inspector's office. So what we're really trying to capture here is the lost storage and some counter prep and organization space. The organization in terms of getting the food out the door. So what this does is really allows us to keep the storage in the room. We don't need to have storage outside the room in any other corner of the town hall. We capture all of that here, either with pantries or cabinet. We can reuse some of the cabinets, but we'll definitely need some more. We take the door out that's there, and we do a wider food service window. So by taking this whole extra space here, about 9 by 12, we didn't really change the food service or food prep side. What we did was we changed the storage and the food distribution side to the seniors or the guests. So that is a big difference, and then you wouldn't need the hallway. So it does allow for a little bit more elbow room, and you could actually expand some counter and cabinet space here if you want. But by taking half this room, really what we're doing is incorporating, like I said, the storage, everything would happen in-house. We wouldn't need any other corners of the town hall. There's a space beyond that I'm suggesting could be then turned over either to the Board of Health or whatever office and support space that might be. You know, my first thought is it could be a file room. Everybody here has files and you're looking to organize the files. Maybe some departments go here. Maybe some use the old police or fire. But this space initially can be given over to either the Board of Health or whoever might occupy that. I know you have a chance of maybe moving some people around. But the real difference between Plan A and B is really in just expanding a little bit of just storage and food service space. So, you know, I think in either plan, we can make it work. Plan A is modest and tight. It could still function, but it requires storage in other corners. Plan B, same functionality, except a little bit, definitely better improved food service. And the nice thing there is all the storage happens in one space. We're not drifting into corners.
Pretty much contained within the same area.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think this is once again, we're costing A and B with our contractor.
Good.
So we know and understand the difference in what we're getting into. But, you know, in terms of one solution, cost contained all in one space, you know, Plan B captures it all. It's just a matter of what the incremental price increase is and whether that can be, you know, managed by the town. Because we're, you know, this is one increase. We got other increases for the ramp and the changes there. So that's why we're trying to develop these, price them out on line items so we can share them with you folks.
When we presented this to the AAB in 2013, we got the okay not to do anything to the former police area because they were moving out and they subsequently have moved out.
Yep.
If we displace the building inspector, that's probably the logical area to move him into.
Which
In
would
your,
then mean,
in your experience, do we need to go back? Clearly, we're going to have to inform the AAB of this change, but
I think
do
actually,
you think we're going to have any issue?
well, we would, if we
The door doesn't have sufficient maneuver.
Yep. It would, if we displace that and make that the building inspector's office, that space would have to be renovated to be accessible. I don't believe we have to go to AEB because it would just land in the permit. We would draw it, specify it to comply with code. If we couldn't comply with code because there was masonry or door, we would then have to apply for a waiver. Honestly, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
But if it means, you know, if it means we do this and we take half that space, then what you potentially might be asking me is, well, look at this corner and make, you know, now we need a building inspector's office.
We do.
And now I need to schedule the renovations that are required there to be code compliant, and we got to work that into the total project cost.
That's part of that option.
Yep. So we will follow that string out. We'll look at the space that's left and look at developing that for whether it's the building inspector or any other, you know, public official. The space would need to be accessible. Storage room, I think, would be the only space that you could get by with not being accessible.
Now, they raised no issue with the building inspector where he is right now. And I believe the door is the same size there as it is where the former police office was.
True. Technically, you know, if we're renovating enough, we've got a whole host of waivers. I'd have to read through all the waivers because we had doors and hardware scattered throughout the building. So I'd have to actually reread the report. We might have tagged a handful of other doors in the building that were potentially non-compliant. And even if we didn't tag it as non-compliant, if it is non-compliant,
It is non-compliant. we know
it
that.
might ultimately need to be worked into the equation because at more than 100,000, more than 30%
Yeah.
over the time window, it says everything must be compliant. So it might, you know, in this case of the conversation, it might mean one or two more doors need to be factored into the pricing. We can make sure of that.
Okay, but to look at that Plan B, we do need to look at the building inspector's area, a potential
Yep.
relocation site.
Okay, so I mean, basically, those are the things that we see
All right.
as they sit. You know, if you ask me to make the kitchen work in the space that's left, we have a plan. I think it could be workable. Would people necessarily be happy? You know, I can't, I don't know, but we know you could live and function in the space. And to that end, we at least have an option on the table for pricing and for discussion. And then it's up to you folks to
Understand.
give us clear direction on how we're going to proceed. And that's what we put down in the final scope and price. And then that's what's on the final drawing that we take to town vote ultimately. That's what we're working towards anyway.
So from us, you're looking for some guidance on next steps. And Libby, I know we haven't really,
Well, we'll
but
give
we
you-
are looking for the costs of those two options for the kitchen area, right? We want to know what that's going to cost, each of them. And to include in that second option, going into the building inspector, the relocation in that cost.
Yep.
And the second, back to your point, you were asked the question about what would they recommend regarding if we went to the second entry to the lower level, what options they might recommend. Obviously, we want to look at the basic one, the strip down and the membrane.
Right.
And how about if we have them look at the green one with the planting,
Right. I think,
as
Want that
opposed
be
to,
the second one?
yeah, as opposed to the,
I don't have a problem
so
with
we'd
that.
have those costs.
We do need options.
Right.
yep, and that's what we're doing.
So the options for all these would be, A, do nothing in the kitchen, or one of these two. And B, with respect to the ramp, either we're back to the original, and/or adding the second ramp
Yep,
going down.
and we're pricing
Those are
all
the-
that.
Yeah, and we'll get the prices for all that, and
And so we're working on that to get that pricing in order before we reconvene, which is really 2 weeks, right?
13th.
Considering-
So we've already circulated the base price requests to the
Yeah.
contractor, a week ago. And I talked with them.
Okay, are we going back to revisit the base price again?
We're going
Because
to,
I thought we just got those on the 27th of July.
those,
You gave us
Yeah.
was it 1.5, roughly 1.5 million for the accessibility, which included the fire
yes.
suppression?
That did, yes.
Yes.
And,
The contract, I don't know if I brought the contractor's estimate with me for that, but the contractor's estimate had been done
and you added a 5%.
prior. We loosely rounded up.
Yeah,
So
right.
after this much time in returning, we're trying not to round
I
up.
understand. Yeah,
So we're taking the base price, having the contractor look at it, because, they're in tune with material increases, changes in prevailing wages and labor.
So the original plan, which had nothing in the kitchen area, was the 1.5, took care of all the code requirements and satisfied everything we needed with AAB.
Yep.
But that did not
Well, we looked at
did not
it.
include cable TV.
No.
It did
It
not
did not.
include anything for COA or the other 250,000 originally we're talking about for the museum.
Correct.
So, okay.
Does that include cable, museum? It
Cable.
gets you up the landing, it creates a second floor landing, it
Right.
modifies the doors.
Gets us to the door.
Gets you to the door.
And the fire suppression.
Yep, and electrical and fire.
Accessibility, and, yeah.
Yep. So,
Okay.
after this much time and this many times around, we needed to kind of get a gut check on the original price, because we don't want to carry a number
Right.
forward too long without adjusting it.
Right.
So that's
Fair enough.
baseline, we're doing that.
We-
Then we've
we-
got two
We
options
don't want
on
to go to
everything.
town meeting and,
Oh, no. So that's why we're going baseline, checking the price on the original, and we've got, two options on the kitchen, two options on the ramp, two options on the roof, So anyway, we're doing our best to kind of flush out the opportunities and the costs that go with those, so we can make some good informed decisions.
Okay.
appreciate it very much.
Good.
Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you. Anybody else? No?
Thanks.
Try to get us to as much of the finished product as you project, cost-wise. Because what we don't want to do, as Jeff has alluded to, and we don't want to have a situation where we've got a cost override and we've got to get monies from other sources or go back to town floor, because that's a tough road to hoe, as I'm sure you're aware of.
Oh, yes. we
You get
understand.
one shot, maybe some adjustments, and then we'll go from there. That's my feeling anyway. I don't speak for Jeff and I don't speak for Brian, my colleague.
Well, I think Kevin's going about it the right way, is that, keeping a contractor involved in this thing so we could kind of get the pricing right and everything
Right.
else. And even,
Excellent. Good.
adding a little bit of, overage a little bit, if you will, just to be on the safe side is worth it.
Well, every
It's
contract
worth
calls for, any I've ever dealt with,
Yeah.
Contingency.
cause you got to put in a 5 or 10% or forget it. Because when you go back a second time, your likelihood is strong, pardon the vernacular, but you ain't going to get it.
Yeah.
Yep. No, we
Yeah,
understand.
I mean, oftentimes, sometimes we as professionals, we get involved in, or get caught up in pricing, which is speculative, a little bit more speculative, and, we want to, our expectations are a little bit higher, but yet we want to keep the price so it's not a sticker shock. But, I'm going to town meetings, and I've been involved in that before, where,
Sure.
you got to be very realistic and,
reality.
yeah, and accurate.
It's a delicate
Realistic and
balance.
accurate.
We don't want to overstate and drive a budget up, to the point where it doesn't gain support. But we don't want to underestimate to a point where it
Have to
doesn't
be
cover what
realistic.
eventually comes to be and is not approved. So it's a delicate process. Working a little bit with a contractor that's been here and worked on the site and knows the building is a help. There again, they're only providing pre-construction estimates. It's not a contract, it's not a bid. They're going from
Understood.
schematic drawings
Right.
and a description of the scope, and everyone's familiar with the project. So you're trying to get a good firm number from basically professional knowledge and what is really schematic level design.
Okay.
It's that chicken and egg, It's,
You expect to have that by the 13th or before that?
that's why I was talking. That's why we started him on the baseline over a week ago, and that's why I was calling him yesterday. And following today, we actually already started drafting him. The alternate fee. It's like, okay, now the alternate price is for this ramp. We've already started drafting the language, so he gets the sketches and the exhibits, so he knows what it is we're asking him to price. So we already started that in anticipation of today's meeting, so we could take it, make some final edits based on the outcome of today, and then get it into his hands pretty quickly.
Super.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks for your endeavors.